Pursuant to the markup notice, it is now in order to consider H.R. 9436 to amend the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2023 to extend the time period for which certain regulations concerning the North Atlantic right whale are effective. Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Does any member wish to be recognized for purposes of debate? Mr. Golden, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The U.S. lobster fishery is the most valuable single-species fishery in the Northeast. In Maine alone, it contributes more than $3.2 billion to the state's economy. It supports roughly 18,000 jobs and generates hundreds of millions in tax revenue. Lobster fishing is the backbone of many communities in my district. In some towns, close to 40% of residents can hold a commercial lobster license. Many of these towns could not survive without this fishery. It forms a tax base that pays for their schools, rural infrastructure, public safety, and more. Any threat to this industry is really a threat to the men and women who work on the water, but not only to them, but to the entire community that they are so vital to. This is why we need more time to make sure that any new measures we ask lobstermen to take will strike a very careful balance between protecting marine life and protecting the livelihoods of fishermen themselves. When Congress enacted this moratorium in 2023, we funded new efforts to gather information to help support a data-driven process to establish regulations that made sense for both fishermen and whales. Unfortunately, some of this work, including the work of the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Team, has been slowed by issues within the federal government, including layoffs and government shutdowns. These circumstances have been beyond the control of Maine fishermen. Meanwhile, those charged with gathering the necessary data say that more time is needed. Maine's Department of Marine Resources, using congressionally appropriated funds, has monitored right whales and studied a potential overlap of the whales and fixed fishing gear. They wrote, "We are still gathering various types of data, and we anticipate that several of these data streams will not be able to be incorporated into decision support tools due to the compressed timeline for rulemaking. An extension of the pause would ensure that there's time to incorporate this information and that future rulemaking is based on the best available science." Simply put, my friends, Congress paid for this research. Why then would it not provide the time necessary to make the best use of it? Mr. Chairman, let me lay out a few simple facts. First, without the moratorium that Congress enacted in 2023, lobstering communities face the threat of fishery closures that would have devastated local economies and a centuries-old way of life. Congress enacted the pause out of recognition of that and out of a recognition that we have to get this right. Second, it's undeniable that more time is needed to complete the thoughtful, science-driven process that we need. Despite years of scrutiny, only a single entanglement of a North Atlantic right whale has ever been attributed to Maine waters. So there's no need for a false sense of urgency to rush a process that would be greatly benefited by having more time. Meanwhile, right whale births have exceeded deaths for 4 consecutive years, resulting in positive population growth. We take that as evidence that the regulations already in place and the measures that Maine lobstermen have already implemented are working. The Maine lobster fishery is really not asking for too much here. We're not asking for new funding, a new process, or any kind of new policy mandate. Simply more time to complete the process that this Congress started back in December of 2022. This legislation, H.R. 9436, will provide the additional years necessary to get the science right so that we can protect both. Before I complete my remarks, I want to have added into the record for this markup support for this bill from 7 different entities. We have the Maine Lobstermen's Association, the Maine Lobstering Union, we have the New England Fishermen's Stewardship Association, the Maine Lobster Advisory Council, the Maine Department of Marine Resources, the New Hampshire Commercial Fishermen's Association, and the Massachusetts Lobstermen's Association, all who have set in some very helpful, thoughtful remarks in support of this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion? Mr. Stauber, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another good bipartisan piece of legislation out of this committee. I rise in strong support of H.R. 9436, the Northeast Lobstermen's Protection Act, introduced by my two good friends, Representative Lawler and Representative Golden of Maine. Each and every day, onerous regulations negatively impact our constituents along with the local economies and local communities that we represent. And too often here in Washington, these onerous regulations are put in place without a full understanding of the impact they will have on the ground. These regulations often set unreasonable standards or are set to go into effect on unreasonable timelines. The regulations on the North Atlantic right whale, which are currently mandated to be implemented by the end of 2028, are an example of this unreasonable timeline that will have a negative impact on local and regional economies across New England and will have an outsized impact on Maine lobstermen. This bipartisan legislation before us today does not weaken protections for the North Atlantic right whale. The legislation simply delays implementation of these new regulations so we can get it right. This legislation will allow adequate time to seek input from affected industries and communities, ensuring we have fit-for-purpose regulations that will protect the North Atlantic right whale while not devastating the local economy and our fisheries across New England. I want to commend my good friend Representative Golden for standing up for his constituents and for bringing forth this legislation. And if he wants, I would like to yield the rest of my time to the gentleman from Maine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stauber. And it's great to be serving on this committee with you, as we did for so many years on the Small Business Committee. At this time, I don't have more to add unless there's anything that comes up in debate, so I'll let you yield back your time.
Thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion? Gentlelady, Ms. Grijalva is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act represent two of the nation's most successful and enduring conservation laws, establishing science-based safeguards that protect vulnerable wildlife from exploitation and extinction. This bill undermines both monumental pieces of legislation by unnecessarily extending a broad exemption that allows continued deadly entanglements of the critically endangered North Atlantic right whale. With only a few hundred of these whales remaining, we cannot afford to weaken the very laws designed to prevent their extinction. This year, there have been 2 recorded deaths due to entanglement. Congress should be strengthening protections and preventions, not carving out exemptions and placing one of the world's most endangered marine mammals at even greater risk. Congress should be reinforcing, not eroding, the laws that have served as a backbone of American conservation. My father, Congressman Raul Grijalva, understood that protecting endangered wildlife requires strong laws and political will to enforce them. That is why he championed legislation like the Rescue Whales Act, which invested in innovative technologies and collaborative solutions to reduce vessel strikes and fishing gear entanglements while supporting the long-term recovery of the whale populations. H.R. 9436 ignores that approach. Safer fishing gear and other effective alternatives already exist and have demonstrated that we can both protect marine wildlife while supporting sustainable fisheries. Rather than encouraging innovation and conservation, this bill delays progress by shielding harmful practices from the safeguards established under MMPA and ESA. This legislation also sends the wrong message to coastal communities, fishermen, businesses, and industries across the East Coast that have worked in good faith to comply with conservation measures and do their part to recover the North Atlantic right whale. Creating another legislative waiver, CHIPS, erodes the integrity of our nation's bedrock wildlife laws and sets dangerous precedent for future exemptions whenever compliance becomes inconvenient. We have a responsibility to protect endangered species before they disappear forever, not after it is too late. I urge my colleagues to reject H.R. 9436 and recommit to science-based protections that have defined American conservation for generations. Thank you. I yield back.
Lady yields back. Is there further discussion? Mr. Baggett, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I speak in strong support of H.R. 9436, extending the moratorium on North Atlantic right whale regulation implementation. Look, science must drive the process of rulemaking, and we do not have sufficient science to drive that rulemaking process right now. Additional time is necessary, and we hear from folks in the industry that say, hey, time is necessary to get the science right. At the end of the day, I think it's really important that we send a message to the fisheries, to Maine lobstermen, and saying we're going to make sure that it's not your jobs that are critically endangered. We want to make sure that you have the ability to provide for your families, provide for your communities, and making sure that we pass science-based laws in the House and Senate is one of the ways that we do that. And predictability within industry is important. When people are making long-term investments in their small businesses, it's important that they recognize what that environment is going to be like over the horizon of the useful life of those investments. So I support this legislation, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill would prematurely extend a waiver from the ESA and the MMPA, actively risking the extinction of the critically endangered northern Atlantic right whale. Put simply, without collective action, this whale is at risk of becoming the first of the 14 baleen whale species on Earth to vanish. The northern Atlantic right whale is in urgent need of intervention. The population is just 380 whales. Only 70 breeding females. The population is so small, scientists actually have named and given ID numbers to each individual animal. We're halfway through 2026, and although we were told that there have been some calves born, maybe we should just relax and take it easy on protecting these animals, the truth is we've already lost 2 calves, 3 and 4 years old, to entanglement. And scientists expect a 5-year-old to die soon from injuries from another entanglement. These losses far exceed our annual limits to keep this whale from going extinct. In the midst of this emergency for the North Atlantic right whale, we're marking up a bill that delays federal protections against entanglements by 7 more years. Let's look at how we got here. In 2022, a federal judge ruled that NOAA's Atlantic large whale take reduction plan violated the ESA and the MMPA and ordered immediate updates to avoid entanglements. Shortly after, the Maine lobster industry requested more time to test ropeless gear and gather data. Congress granted a delay through 2028 before new take regulations would take effect, giving the industry time to test out technology and methods that reduce harm to whales. At the same time, Congress established a new program to fund technology, innovation, and also required annual reports from NOAA on the progress being made. Now here we are, 2.5 years before the regulatory deadline, and this bill would further extend this exemption for the American lobster and Jonah crab fisheries by an additional 7 years, bringing the total exemption from the ESA and MMPA to an outrageous 13 years. It is deeply concerning that we have not had a single hearing on this bill or an oversight hearing to ask how things are going with this technology, with these efforts of monitoring everything else that we've said we would do during this freeze on regulation. The majority failed to hold a hearing to examine why NOAA shirked its duty by failing to deliver a single report to Congress as mandated by the original law. The committee has not weighed policy options that would support a robust fishery and whale recovery. I want the Maine lobstermen to thrive, but I've also heard from credible sources that this ropeless gear works just fine and that the real resistance to it is the culture and tradition and pecking order among some of these fishing communities and how they stake their claims. If that's the reason we're putting the North Atlantic right whale at risk of extinction, we should be honest about that, and we should have that conversation and not hide behind these pretexts. This delay would also undermine massive investments. Since 2022, Congress has devoted an estimated $280 million to right whale recovery, and we are seeing some results. Advanced monitoring technologies have improved mapping right whale patterns. Vessels are using trackers to avoid conflicts. Most importantly for this debate, ropeless gear has a near-perfect retrieval success rate and a critical safety feature, the man overboard system. It's now an open-source technology for ropeless gear developers. But instead of taking an honest look at these issues and at the progress that we've made and the additional policy levers necessary to support a thriving fishery and to recover this whale population, this bill legislates blindly, throws away the momentum that we have created, and kicks the can down the road. It is a bad bill I request that my colleagues join me in voting no, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion? I recognize myself, and I strongly support Mr. Lawler and Mr. Golden's bipartisan bill to extend the moratorium on regulations that would devastate Maine's iconic lobster fishery and bring severe economic hardship to the families that depend on this industry. For nearly 30 years, the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Team has overseen the Maine lobster and Jonah crab fisheries. They have implemented and updated a take reduction plan to minimize the fishery's impacts on right whales. And for decades, the Maine lobster fishery has led conservation efforts to reduce right whale entanglements in their gear. The industry has removed more than 30,000 miles of rope from the Gulf of Maine, replaced all of its floating rope with sinking rope, and endured significant closures in highly productive fishing grounds, all to prevent interactions with endangered right whales. In its 2020 proposed rule, the National Marine Fisheries Service stated that between 2009 and 2018, the American lobster fishery accounted for just one entanglement every 5 years. Despite these conservation measures, the usual suspects litigated every permit for the American lobster fishery, seeking ever more draconian restrictions for the American fishery while ignoring the Canadian fishery's impacts. As a result, the American lobster fishery has been subject to regulatory whiplash in 4 different biological opinions between 2010 and 2021. In 2021, the National Marine Fisheries Service issued its most recent biological opinion for the American lobster fishery, and these serial litigant groups remain dissatisfied. At the same time, the Maine Lobstermen's Association, joined by Janet Mills, the Democratic governor of Maine, sued NOAA for failing to rely on the best available science and ignoring long-standing conservation efforts to reduce the fishery's impacts. Most recently, the Maine congressional delegation came together to enact a regulatory pause for the American lobster and Jonah crab fisheries in the fiscal year 2023 Consolidated Appropriations Act. The legislation provided ESA and MMPA coverage for the American lobster and Jonah crab fisheries under the 2021 biological opinion through 2028, providing time and resources to develop innovative gear and conservation measures to further minimize the fishery's impact to right whales without disastrous economic consequences to one of America's most iconic fisheries. The Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries Subcommittee has conducted extensive oversight of this issue. In 2023, the subcommittee held a legislative hearing on a bill sponsored by the late Representative Grijalva to repeal these crucial provisions of the Consolidated Appropriations Act. During that hearing, the subcommittee heard from fishermen, unions, and scientists about the poor data quality underpinning NOAA's regulatory approach and the harm a repeal would cause to the industry. More recently, the subcommittee held a July 2025 legislative hearing on draft legislation proposing a broad suite of reforms to the Marine Mammal Protection Act, including provisions identical to H.R. 9436, which was discussed at length during the hearing. More than $90 million has been invested in developing the innovative gear and robust data to understand whale distribution, the effects of new technologies, and the appropriate future management activities. It will likely be impossible to gather the data to inform future management, convene a new take reduction team, and implement a rational management framework by the current deadline of 2028. This legislation extends the pause to 2035, will allow the scientific community, the regulated industry, and fishery managers the time necessary to chart the fishery's future while protecting the families who depend on a vibrant lobster fishery from frivolous litigation by organizations whose only goal is to shut down their way of life. I would be remiss if I did not applaud Congressman Jared Golden for his tireless defense of his hardworking constituents and his leadership on this important issue. He has been a champion for the American fishing industry in restoring sanity to our broken permitting process. Again, I support H.R. 9436. I urge my colleagues to do the same, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the bill? Hearing none, it is now in order to consider amendments to H.R. 9436. We will now consider the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 9436 offered by the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Golden, designated Golden 41 A&S. Without objection, the amendment is considered read and open to amendment at any point. Mr. Golden, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Pretty straightforward amendment with a simple short title change. I wanted to take a quick minute here and just reiterate to my colleagues, we gave money to the state of Maine back as part of the delay that we implemented in late 2022. This is what has been accomplished with it. Back in 2022, NOAA had almost no oversight going on in the Gulf of Maine. They did very few flights. They said that they had a hard time really even finding the whales ever in the Gulf of Maine. That's the federal government saying we have no visibility in the Gulf of Maine. So what has the Maine Department of Marine Resources done? It's deployed in the last 3 years a vast network of acoustic monitors in the Gulf of Maine to listen for right whale calls. It's also regularly watched for right whales on dedicated voyages and flights. So Maine is now doing the federal government's job for it. They're also using gliders that travel underneath the water and can detect whale calls right down to particular individual whales if their call has been put into an existing database of known right whale calls. We're getting down to the level of being able to find and say, this whale right here, we have found him, he's doing well, she is doing well and healthy. This is the type of information that everyone wants and knows can make a massive, massive difference on protecting the right whale without doing any unnecessary harm to any fisheries. So much progress has been made here, and yet the take reduction team's work is going to have to start this fall without any of that data that's been collected and that critical information. It just defies common sense to move forward on that timeline. Again, some of the delays in this work, not the fault of fishermen, really the fault of Congress and the federal government. They shouldn't bear the brunt of those delays. We can take a little bit more time, get more data, deploy more of this new technologies, and as I've said all along, this is about getting it right the next time we go through a TRT rather than doing the job half-blind and doing the job poorly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the ANS? I recognize myself. I support the ANS to H.R. 9436. This amendment renames the legislation the Northeast Lobstermen Protection Act of 2026, an apt short title for a common sense bill. I urge my colleagues to support the ANS, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the ANS? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair, I just ask unanimous consent at this time to enter 3 letters into the record. The first is from Conservation, Science, and Whale Watch organizations across Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida opposing this legislation. The second is from 4 members of the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Team opposing this legislation. And the third is from hundreds of signers across the United States opposing the legislation.
Without objection, so ordered. If there's no further discussion on the amendment, it's now in order to consider amendments to the ANS and H.R. 9436. We'll now consider the amendment designated Magaziner 1 offered by the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Magaziner. Without objection, the amendment is considered read. Mr. Magaziner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Being from Rhode Island, along with Mr. Golden, I'm one of the few members of this committee from the region that is impacted by this bill. We have a big commercial fishing industry in my district, including a lobster industry, and we also have North Atlantic right whales migrating across our coast. North Atlantic right whale deaths are a real problem. There are only 380 North Atlantic right whales left on Earth, and the population is declining. And by far, the leading confirmed causes of whale deaths are boat strikes and fishing gear entanglements, particularly the traps and pots used to catch lobsters and Jonah crabs. I believe that blocking all rulemaking for nearly a decade is the wrong approach and will lead to more whale deaths and drive the species closer to extinction. But look, if we are going to pass this legislation today, let's ask ourselves, what else can we do to prevent these whale deaths? So my amendment will do a couple of things, all of which I think should be uncontroversial. It will provide funding to assist fishermen throughout the region to deploy ropeless gear if they choose to do so. That will reduce entanglements, while ensuring that fishermen remain on the water making a living. This will build on work that has already been done and funding that has already been committed in the past. In 2023, I was very proud to help Rhode Island receive almost $3.5 million to aid lobster and other fixed gear fishermen to get ropeless gear on their boats, which was used to great effect. My amendment also makes additional changes. It funds the National Marine Mammal Entanglement Response Networks, which do the dangerous and essential work of freeing whales who get tangled up. It funds research and monitoring of right whales to ensure that our efforts to recover the species are working. And it once again requires NOAA to send a report to Congress on the state of the right whale and the transition to ropeless gear. This report was first required in 2023, but NOAA has never sent it to Congress, and that is unacceptable. This amendment will help save the North Atlantic right whale species while also protecting jobs in the fishing industry. Again, I don't think anything about it is in any way partisan and controversial. If we're going to pass this bill, then we might as well at least also do something to help protect this species. So to be clear again, I don't support the underlying bill. I don't believe it's the right approach. But if we are going to do this, then let's also at least do something to try to protect the North Atlantic right whale. I'll ask my colleagues to support the amendment. And before I yield back, I will just acknowledge and thank my senior L.A. Marie, who helped draft this amendment. It's her birthday today. So happy birthday, Marie. And I yield back.
Thank you very much. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment would help move both our U.S. fisheries and the North Atlantic right whale toward a thriving future, so I support it. Our goal must be a robust American lobster and Jonah crab fishery that can coexist safely with right whales in their New England habitat. Over the past 4 years, there's no doubt we have made progress. Thanks to ropeless gear, over 1 million pounds of North American seafood has been sustainably and safely brought to market. Unlike the underlying bill, this amendment offers resources to build on this momentum. It would support continued technology research and deployment, and would make the United States a global leader in sustainable fishing gear. Being the first nation to reach economies of scale for this technology is within our grasp. We should want to do that. But we won't get there if we stymie progress with this short-sighted and defeatist legislation. While these fisheries have taken some steps to reduce their risk to whales, entanglements in fishing gear continue to far exceed sustainable levels every year. When the 2021 biological opinion was finalized, we had 350 whales, and the population was in free fall. Today, due to the collaborative efforts of scientists, engineers, and fishermen who want to do their part, and backed by strong federal funding, the population may have stabilized at around 380 individuals, at least in the short term, but better is not good enough. Each preventable entanglement is still one too many for a whale population teetering on the edge of extinction, and we must continue to develop real-world solutions that minimize that risk while keeping fishermen on the water. This amendment would also authorize funding for 2 additional areas: monitoring of North Atlantic right whale and funding for marine mammal entanglement response, so that stranding and entanglement response teams have the resources they need to free whales that are caught in lethal fishing rope and conduct necropsies to help inform our management efforts and prevent future deaths. Lastly, this amendment improves accountability. It would require NOAA to officially report on this topic to Congress no later than 90 days after enactment of this bill. And to date, as has been noted, NOAA just hasn't done that. They've not drafted a single report required by Section 101 of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2023. Without this objective information, it's nearly impossible for Congress to craft sound policy and prioritize investments. As I said earlier, we should be examining a suite of policy options to protect American livelihoods and save an iconic species from extinction. This amendment helps do that. I urge support for it and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. I do oppose the amendment because the amendment would effectively end the bill's prospects of advancing through the House. It includes nearly $250 million in new funding authorizations without any offsets. Further, the one funding authorization that this amendment decreases is critical research funding aimed at developing gear necessary for the future of American lobster fisheries. I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Mr. Magaziner, designated Magaziner number 1. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Chairman, request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed.